Of the Immigration Nation Canada. It's almost like a what is it? A podcast, a vodcast, I guess. This has been so much fun to do these Immigration Nation episodes, because originally it all started with a podcast. And then when I discovered video, it was so awesome to bring guests in and to actually let you see who is joining me as a guest. And I've got some fantastic guests today that I know you're going to enjoy. So stay tuned and we'll be back. All right. So Mark Holthe is my name. I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer. I'm the founder of the Canadian Immigration Institute, and I am the host of this amazing little, I guess, series we call Immigration Nation, not to be confused with the Immigration Nation down south. So this Immigration Nation Canada is where I bring on guests from all different aspects of immigration. Sometimes I bring on immigration lawyers. Sometimes I bring on individuals that are producing, just different services that help within the whole immigration process. And sometimes I get lucky and I bring on people that have founded something that's really cool. And that's the case today. So I want to slide over here and welcome Veronica and Dana with TalentLift. How are you guys doing?
Good, thank you.
It's
great to be here, Mark.
Yeah, it's great to have you guys here. So the fun part about this is today we're going to talk about IRCC's Economic Mobility Pathways Pilot. And I think before you guys reached out to me, and our good friend Sarah Fagan introduced me to you guys, Sarah's I'm hoping I can get her on as a guest here. She was on one of my podcasts in the past, but before that, I'd never heard of it. I'll be honest. The immigration that I do is pretty narrow and pretty focused, but I wasn't familiar with the Economic Mobility Pathways Pilot. And this is really timely because I understand there was an announcement today. But before we get into the EMPP, let's talk a little bit about you guys for our viewers. So Veronica, can you share just a little bit of information about yourself, kind of your background, and Veronica and Dana are the founders of TalentLift. So we'll let you introduce yourselves a little bit, and then we can dive in a little bit as to what TalentLift is and what it does.
Perfect. First of all, thank you so much for having us, and thank you for everything that you do, providing this information and all information about Canadian immigration, making it more accessible through this series in your podcast. It's helped me a lot and my colleagues, especially during this crazy year. So I just had to fan out a little bit first before we dive in. So
well, you're very welcome.
So I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer and, as you mentioned, co-founder and also legal director of TalentLift. We're a nonprofit organization supporting employers to source talent from within refugee populations. I also have a private practice, Roots Immigration Law in Toronto, and was a legal advisor to Talent Beyond Boundaries, a global organization with a similar mission. And there I was a representative for the candidates that came through the Economic Mobility Pathways Project, or EMPP. So I was the legal representative and advisor for the candidates that arrived to the program.
Awesome. So Dana, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, I'll repeat that thanks, Mark. It's really a pleasure to be here. And my biography is far less eminent than Veronica's, so it'll be shorter. But I'm Veronica's co-founder of TalentLift. And prior to this, I was, because this is such a new startup, so prior to this, I was the Canada director of that same global organization, Talent Beyond Boundaries. And so I've been working in this space for a few years. And before that, I've primarily been working in migration and refugee policy and civil society in government and with other organizations. So, and we'll get a lot more into TalentLift and what we're doing.
Awesome. That's great. So obviously this is right in your wheelhouse. This is something that you guys have been passionate about, something that you have been involved with and driving forward for years. And so you both described involvement with other organizations, but how did TalentLift form and why did it form?
Yeah, for sure. I think just to take a step back and look at the big picture, maybe about what the problem is and what we're trying to solve. So also very timely today, UNHCR released their annual Global Trends Report. So for 2020, the number of people forcibly displaced globally, it rose by 4%. So it's now at 82.4 million, which is an increase from 79.5 billion. So with these record numbers.
Veronica, I'm going to cut in a little bit here. So what do you mean by a displaced person? So someone who is unfamiliar with that term, can you explain what that means?
Yeah, for sure. So there's refugees who are maybe registered within UNHCR or have a refugee determination status. And then there's people that may not have registered, but they still had to flee persecution or flee their home country. So they are displaced now and in need of international protection.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. Thank you.
So yeah, with this incredibly record high level of displacement, there's complementary pathways that are now being developed to explore durable solutions that are outside of the traditional refugee resettlement, because right now currently only 1% of the refugee population can access the refugee resettlement program. So and just amongst this population are just incredibly talented individuals with skills that are in high demand. There's nurses, software developers, welders, butchers, so many. So the idea is that there is this incredibly talented group of individuals, and then there's employers in Canada at the same time who are facing shortages and need to hire internationally when local talent isn't available. So they are looking to hire internationally, yet the current federal and provincial immigration programs weren't made with refugees in mind. So there are some barriers, such as having a valid passport or settlement funds that may be prohibiting them from entering. So yeah, so what we're trying to do is open international job and visa opportunities to displaced talent as a viable solution to the global refugee crisis. Excuse me. So that's kind of the big picture, and how TalentLift formed. Maybe Dana want to jump in and explain a bit about our little history, our very recent history.
Yeah, sure. Just before I get to our organization, just to really emphasize that employer demand that we're seeing. I mean, the piece about skill shortages across the country won't surprise anyone, but we've seen just an immense appetite for specifically recruiting from within this population that we're working with. It's just that previously really employers didn't have access or really visibility of this population. So we can jump more into that in terms of the company types and sectors and networks that we're working with. But yeah, so about TalentLift, we are a Canadian nonprofit talent agency. So we function very similarly to a for-profit talent agency, but we are for-profit. So we're dedicated to supporting employers to recruit and relocate candidates from within refugee populations. So people who are still living outside of Canada, extremely talented, qualified, willing to contribute, but currently still living in refugee circumstances. So we are full services to make this a really seamless experience for hiring teams, and our services encompass the talent search, so actually finding that talented candidate, visa applications through our in-house legal counsel, who is Veronica, and her team, and settlement coordination as well. So you heard the bit of the personal background on Veronica and I, and just our involvement in kind of this space over the few years. But I think that just really kind of the reason why we've jumped into this and decided to co-found kind of an organization that can deepen this mission is just we've seen the enormous potential out there, again, both on the demand side, employers, needing skills, willing to recruit internationally, and really intrigued by the potential in this talent pool, and just the potential on the other side. The candidates we work with, of course, are incredible. It's just, but for these circumstances, they would be able to apply just like any other applicant. So we created TalentLift to really leverage this potential and really improve and expand the services that are available to employers. So we know that in order for all of this to work, of course we are relocating refugees and their families, but it all starts with the employer. And so this really has to be a service that works for them. So I think I should also just touch on a kind of unique element of how we work, which folks might be interested in hearing about, just how we actually find refugee candidates living outside of Canada.
I was going to ask that question, and I was also going to ask, how do employers connect with you? But maybe I didn't want to jump too far ahead of your presentation here. So Yeah.
Yeah, so starting with the supply side, so we work really closely with a lot of NGOs in refugee, or the refugee serving NGOs working in host countries where people live. And so we really rely on our partners in different areas of the world. So they're kind of like first point of contact with the candidates and know the context and the individuals very well. And so we're working with the global organization that Veronica and I were previously with, Talent Beyond Boundaries, which is working with refugee candidates living in the Middle East. We're also working with a partner in Latin America called HIAS, and they work in many countries across that region. And there's a few other NGOs, and we're still developing a few other partnerships, so I won't name them, but this is really core to our mission as well, that we can, as we're growing the job and skill visa opportunities on the candidate side, that we're ensuring that these opportunities are increasingly accessible to people from many different and diverse geographies. So yeah, it's just to wrap that up, it's really exciting that Canadian employers have access to these talent sources that were previously out of reach. And the way employers can contact us, we can share our contact information, but anyone's welcome to reach out. And Veronica will just ensure the fit for international recruitment.
Okay, that makes sense. You can see so that we've got a few people that are tuned in here that are watching live, and I want to let those guests that are watching. This is something different. It is something that we haven't traditionally covered here on the Immigration Nation or on the channel. And so, to a large extent, Veronica and Dana, you are accessing a pool of candidates that are every bit as qualified, every bit as skilled, every bit is really able to come and help us meet our labor shortages from a group of people that otherwise probably would have no hope. If you're saying 1% of all of these displaced people actually have a shot at getting placed, I shudder to think what happens, to these individuals. So you work with the NGOs to target and identify, and then on the employer side. So let's say I'm an employer and I say, you know what, I'm looking for this skill set, and I'm open to wherever that skill set may be. How do they connect with you, and do you screen them? Do you vet the employer? How does that work? Because I'll be honest, not all employers are created equally, right? And as much as I wouldn't, as much as I love the foreign worker program, there's a lot of employers that I could see, and I don't want to get down a path that that we don't want to get down, but is there checks and balances kind of to make sure that the employers you're partnering with and that are going to be good for these people, not just try to exploit them?
I think that's a really important question.
Yeah, go ahead, Veronica.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think I need to switch to data here. I just want to say I love that you asked about if we vet the employers, because most people ask about the candidates and vetting the candidates, but the caliber of our candidates are just unbelievable, and it's essentially like an untapped talent pool. So it's nice to have that question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And it is a really important question because, of course, not all employers are created equally, like you've said. But honestly, like it has been not a problem at all for us, but in terms of what we actually do have in place. So there are kind of a few things that employers have to do to work with us. One is that we kind of skipped over a piece of kind of like who we are at TalentLift, but we're a social enterprise. So employers do pay a fee for service. And that actually is what we think is actually a pretty cool innovation for this type of work, because, of course, employers pay fees to hire talent from any other part of the world and from any other background. And first and foremost, when employers recruit with us, they do it because they need to fill a skill shortage. They can't find local talent in Canada, and they really need a skilled person. And then a second imperative we've seen really clearly from the employers we work with is that they have a humanitarian impulse as well. Like they really see and understand the kind of transformative impact of this. Like through recruiting internationally and finding a skilled person to fill a role that you need to fill, you can support somebody who is living in refugee circumstances right now and their family to relocate to a new home country. That's pretty incredible for an employer to be able to do. So that just to say that there is a fee for service involved. So employers do have to invest in this. We also require that our employer partners provide a little bit more on the arrival and settlement side, because while this is someone who's coming in who's extremely skilled and can hit the ground running, there are differences between this type of newcomer and other newcomers to Canada. A big one is that a lot of our candidates, for example, are coming in with no savings at all. So they really need some support in those first few weeks, also coming in with like usually no personal networks. And so we ask employers that we work with to provide a few key supports in the arrival stage. And one of those is meeting and greeting the family at the airport on arrival, providing transitional housing until they can find a rental home, and providing a point of contact on the company team for what we call informal orientation support. And some companies have done things differently, and it has looked like, you know, one person who takes the lead. It has looked like a committee of multiple team members, and overwhelmingly we've seen employer teams like really energized and excited to be involved in that component. And then maybe just quickly on another aspect of like the vetting, I suppose, that's involved in the employer side is that, and Veronica can speak to this better, but we support our candidates, like, yes, through temporary entry on work permits, because that is the swiftest way to arrive, but we ensure that they have a pathway to permanent residence as well. So that is a bit of an extra kind of check and balance that's built into our model.
That's great. We've got a little bit of technical difficulty in the background there, but it's all good. We got you back in here, Veronica. Our feed is a little it's not quite as clear as we would have hoped, but it's totally fine. There's no problems at all. So here's a question that came in from one of the listeners, and the question, Noor says, do you follow up with refugees once they are placed and settled in Canada to ensure they are fully integrated? Is there some sort of, you know, psychological support that you provide? So what are your thoughts on that? Because often I can tell you this does not exist, and very rarely does this exist in the world of traditional placement of talent.
Yeah, so we do provide post-placement support for like a minimum of 6 months. And yeah, we do have I mentioned like one of the services we provide is kind of settlement coordination. And that actually does involve working to put together a settlement plan that's individualized for the candidate and their family before arrival. That is tailored to the community that they'll be arriving into, so we can actually provide in advance like the right services for them to tap into. But I think one important point, like for everyone, just to kind of understand that the candidates who we work with really are not among the most vulnerable kind of among that larger refugee population group. It's not to say that they're not vulnerable, and you know, it's an enormous diversity, so it's very hard to make any generalizations, but it's just to say that the candidates who have the skills and potential and the drive to use their skills to move on skilled immigration pathways are folks who oftentimes, for example, are currently working in their host countries, who may have slightly higher English, who usually do have some formal training, not always college and universities, some technical training or high school, but in general, they're kind of work and job ready. And that is a distinguishing factor, which is, you know, actually wonderful about complementary pathways, that the kind of big theory behind all this is that the more people who are able to access skilled visas and actually opens up that really critical space in the humanitarian programs, you know, where people are actually selected on the basis of their vulnerability. So it's two very different objectives. But I think that is an excellent question, and hopefully those kind of both answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so, you know, our video feed here is not quite as clear here, but that's okay. Everybody's coming in loud and clear audio wise, so there's no problems with that at all. Now, I did want to, like, as far as TalentLift itself, we've covered kind of both of the sides of the spectrum a little bit. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to share about TalentLift itself before we transition to this new announcement and the actual program that you guys are involved with, the government program?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so a bit of delay on my end, but that's the fun part about being live. So I just wanted to mention that last month we were registered as a civil society organization. So the legal fees, I know there's a fee for service, but the legal fees are pro bono for the organization. So it makes it more accessible. And the civil society organization is something new from 2019 with the Law Society that allows nonprofits and charities to provide in-house legal services when previously they would need to be outsourced.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. So should we shift over to the new program? Does that make sense? Should we start chatting about that? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So I'm just going to change and just move over to so this is a blog that you guys just hot off the press today, June 18th, which is the date we're doing this live stream. And this is the website, and there will be a link for anyone who's interested in learning more. Everything from the contact information to the website itself here for TalentLift Canada. But you guys have recently released, so Minister Mendicino just recently announced the latest steps to redesign skilled visas for talent in displacement, which is right exactly what you guys are talking about. And so we've got this blog that you have released. And then here we'll also put in the description of the video after, because this is literally hot off the press. And I understand there's been program delivery instructions that have been released and then pulled back. And I don't know if they're back up again, but just right off the bat, this economic mobility pilots mobility pathways pilot. This has been in existence since 2018. And I guess the question I have for you guys as I shift back to us here, why the heck have I not heard of this thing? You know, is it like a secret that the government has kept? Because, 2018, that's 3 years we're talking here that it's been in place. So can you give us a little bit of background on this program? Pilots sometimes are secretive, but I haven't seen a lot about it. So.
Yeah, honestly, I don't blame you. And we can, I think the best way to answer that is actually because it's different than other types of pilots. Like, it's not a unique visa pathway. So it's not the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program. It's not the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program. It's actually best understood as, to date, it has been best understood as like a case management system. Before I jump into that, I think it's actually really helpful to hear, like, Veronica, if you just want to talk to what it was like before the EMPP, to kind of explain like what the thing is and why it's so needed.
Yeah, absolutely. So before the EMPP, like as an immigration lawyer, I do consultations with people and sometimes have calls with people in refugee circumstances or people in Canada with family members who are living displaced. And they tell me how they're highly skilled or have master's degrees, amazing work experience. And I have to explain to them that, yes, you qualify for this program, and yes, your skills are in high demand in Canada, but they were not built for people in your circumstances. And sorry that you're not able to get like your official transcripts because your university was destroyed in the war, or you can't renew your passport because it would put your safety at risk. So that therefore you cannot apply. So what the EMPP really does is to test those applicants within the existing streams and identify some of those barriers, like the education documents and passports and other things that do come up. And we just kind of research that to see what they would be and how to develop, what could develop from that research.
And just to clarify here, this is a permanent resident program, or is it a temporary? So is the status that these individuals obtain, is it a work permit or is it permanent resident status?
So to date, it has been permanent residence. Yeah, so it has been permanent residence, and the pilot actually started back in 2018. So just to add a little bit more flesh on just the what Veronica just explained it as, back in 2018. So just like where we're at today, like the displacement figures had been rising globally. And at that time, there had been this kind of international conversation happening in the background around the real need for like additional mobility options for people. And this is like the language around this is like complementary pathways. and poor Veronica dealing with connectivity issues. I'll just continue the summary. But so
just to
that was the
clarify, you
context.
guys, just to clarify, I know on your end, it probably seems like everything isn't as clear, but the audio is really good. Everybody can hear. So there's no issues. And the video may kind of, you know, maybe get a little bit more grainy, but it's still A-okay. So don't worry about it.
Thank
I'm on
you.
my data
And bear with
too.
us, everyone, after a year. But yeah, no, apologies to everyone who's been dealing with these types of things for a year now.
I know. Yeah. And we'll definitely have you guys back too, once you get things kind of sorted out and you figure out what's happening with these new programs and the real impact and the successes, because we want to hear the success stories as well. So this is just our first opportunity. Yeah. So it can only go up from here. So we're good.
Exactly. So yeah, just to like summarize again, so this was back in 2018 when there was just a really clear international conversation about the need for additional pathways for people globally. And at that time, if you remember, Mark, the 2 global compacts were agreed and negotiated, and Canada is party to those. And both of the compacts included a commitment to expand access to legal visa pathways, essentially. And so the EMPP pilot was really Canada's answer to that. And so what it did, again, it does not create a new visa pathway. It was created to test and improve, essentially, access by talented candidates who secure job offers in Canada through existing visa programs. And it did, in its first phase, focus on permanent residence pathways only. And, you know, again, like I think anyone probably listening in on this, like in your audience, like will be familiar with like the kind of split of our immigration programs in Canada. But the skilled immigration space, again, is just the kind of huge opportunity area. So we know that there's, you know, the economic stream is the largest share of the permanent residence pathways. But our kind of position at TalentLift, we'd love to see this pilot go bigger and include all of Canada's work permit pathways as well. That can actually lead to a permanent residence pathway, and that's just because, again, like it's we have over, I think it was like the last year before COVID in 2019, it was Canada had issued over 400,000 work permits. So these are skilled newcomers coming into the country. And if you just think about, like, you know, candidates living in displacement, just 1% of those could be accessed by people in displacement. That's already over 4,000 people like moving to Canada on skilled pathways. But so that's, again, just kind of some of the context. But like to maybe just provide an example of then like what this EMPP actually does to help people like get through the skilled visa application. I mentioned it's similar. It's kind of like a case management system. Mm-hmm. So typically everything starts with an employer hiring a candidate. So there's an employment match. And then a legal representative like Veronica works with them on the application, say it's to the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, and then to permanent residence. And that's where this EMPP kicks in, and it says, okay, if you have an expired passport, that's fine. We're not going to make you renew that passport, you know, and follow the what exists right now as a requirement across all pathways for a valid passport. So that's one example of what the EMPP allows us to overcome. So it intentionally kind of builds in some flexibility, largely around administrative and financial barriers facing candidates. It does not address human capital factors, which we think is largely a good thing. So, you know, it doesn't let, if a pathway requires CLB 4 or 5, it doesn't let us overcome that. So again, these are skilled and qualified candidates. It's just there are certain things about their circumstances that normally would just exclude them right from the start from even applying.
And, you know, I'll jump in on, let's take express entry, for instance. So I've spoken on a number of panels at our national immigration conference. You know, twice I think I spoke on express entry, and routinely the question came up, and I get it all the time from people, you know, my school burned down, right? And these are people that are totally, you know, they're fine. They're not displaced. My school burned down. You know, I can't get the records to prove my education. My employer has shut down. Like they're non-existent. And so I'm having trouble proving my work experience. And immigration's response to those individuals is not our problem. You know, we've got a million other people that want to immigrate. And if you can't produce the documents that make our life easier for the assessment process, well, then sorry, you know, too bad, so sad, which is really the approach that they take. It's ruthless. It's merciless. But then you've got the whole balance of fraud and everything else that's always what they use is the reasoning for taking such a strict, stringent approach is the high rates of fraud and fraudulent documents and those kinds of things. And so it's really interesting to see that this program, in a way, for displaced people can act as a way to overcome that and to build compassion into that system. So I find that very interesting.
Right. I agree. It would be great to have the EMPP as a precedent to expand into other areas of the economic immigration pathways and to see these flexibilities and access to be available to candidates that are currently in Canada as well.
Yeah, it would be really, really neat. So we've got an announcement here. Did you guys want to go ahead?
Should I hop off
let's get to the
and log
announcement.
back in again?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, what was that, Veronica? We're still connected here.
I think I might log off and try to hop back in again.
You know, Veronica,
okay?
Veronica, you're actually okay. You are okay. So don't worry about it kind of fading in and out. As long as you can hear me, and if there's a little bit of delay, no problem at all. It's just fine. The feed kind of comes in and then it comes out a little bit, but don't worry about it. It's just fine. Yeah. So what else can you tell you? So we've got the new program. Well, we've got the new released announcement, I should say. So do you want to dive into that, you guys? Who'd like to tackle that?
Veronica, do you want me to go or do you want to go? I don't know how strong your connection is.
Okay. I would prefer you to because the delay is a little bit distracting.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, everything that's happened to date under the pilot has kind of been called phase 1. And what we heard today were a few changes that we can expect in phase 2. And Mark, you referenced the fact that like most people haven't heard of this maybe, or like don't know some of the details of it. And one thing we're really excited about is that phase 2 really intends to put very publicly like what the available flexibilities are. So they haven't been released yet, but there will be forthcoming guidelines, we understand. And so, yeah, within the confines of a pilot in the first phase, that's why it has all seemed a little like a black hole. But yeah, some of the really exciting changes that were announced today by the minister. One of the changes that was announced is alternatives to settlement funds. So this has been a really major financial barrier, of course, like in not all of them, but most of the permanent residence pathways. And again, so far the pilot has just been permanent residence. And so that does involve like a few additional complexities, and the ability to demonstrate proof of settlement funds is one of them. And so the announcement that was made today actually didn't provide many concrete details, but we understand that what will be allowed as an alternative proof. So right now what you have to provide is typically it's like savings in the form of liquid funds in a bank account or assets that can be liquid. And what this enables us, we hope to be able to do these alternatives would be the use of loans and grants. So this, just to give you a sense of the scale of the enormity of this barrier, for a family of 3 right now under the federal settlement funds requirements, a family of 3 has to demonstrate it's either nearly or just over 20,000 Canadian dollars. And so, of course, that's like impossible for folks who most of our candidates have little to no savings. And so just being able to use a loan or some other means is pretty significant. So that's one. There's another announcement that some of the fees will be waived. which again, not many details, but yeah, that's the one for permanent residents. And we understand for biometrics as well. Medical exams may be included in that too. And again, this all is really significant. It maybe doesn't seem like a huge kind of window of opening, but really everything counts when folks are in these types of financial circumstances. And then we also had another important component is that while we're in this kind of space of working within permanent residence pathways, the minister announced today a kind of commitment to expedited processing for permanent residence applications. So what that will look like, we understand, is a service standard of 6 months for processing of the permanent residence application. And you know, it's not perfect. I think there's a lot of work that can still be done, but that is a big step forward to be able to have, I think, the predictability and the additional speed. And for folks, just if anyone is unfamiliar with what some of the processing times are in permanent residence pathways, there are some streams already, like Express Entry, the Atlantic Immigration Pilot, that have this 6-month service standard, but others do not. Notably, the provincial nominee programs can be upwards of 20 months. So, you know, obviously when you're working with an employer who has a job to fill and a candidate who happens to be a refugee suddenly is on this timeline that looks like it might be upwards of 20 months, it's a non-starter. So essentially those timelines render this talent pool non-competitive. So it has been really important to get those timelines far, far, far reduced. And then, you know, it's also important to note that this commitment to 6 months, it actually will always be longer than that because there's a first stage application, whether it's a provincial nominee application, an Atlantic Immigration Pilot application, an Express Entry application, that comes first, and then you tack on 6 months to that. So essentially what this will do is kind of reduce the total processing time to like 8 to 10 months. You know, some employers can do that if they're larger, if they've got more evergreen type of roles. And we've seen a lot of employers, you know, put their hand up and still say, like, I don't love it, but it'll work for me. I believe in the mission, it'll work for me. But in order to really, really scale this work, that's one of the things to jump to one of our kind of hopeful next stage steps of or what we'd still like to see come is really expanding this work to work permits as well as the fastest way into Canada to really scale and enable a lot of employer buy-in.
Now, how is this pandemic impacting?
I'll pause there with the, yeah.
Yeah. How is the pandemic impacting on the processing? So we've seen overseas that through all of the programs, they basically ground to a halt. So is the expectation that, you know, the processing in these 6-month timelines they're going to start shooting for that standard once the travel restrictions are lifted and people can travel? Or is this something that they're trying to push through in some form, you know, to try to get things moving forward, notwithstanding kind of where we're at with these travel restrictions?
It's a good question. I think
can't speak
notwithstanding
for what's coming in.
Yeah, go ahead, Veronica. Go ahead.
Sorry, Veronica, you go ahead.
It's all good.
Sorry, maybe I can. Okay. Well, so I'd say I can't speak for phase 2, but in phase 1, things were on hold at first, but then as things were getting figured out with the pandemic, we were able to get national interest exemption letters for the candidates who had the permanent residence applications with employers that were facing skilled shortages. Like we had foreign trade nurses that were coming as continuing care assistants. That's a common pathway, and these employers are also supporting them while they do their training to become nurses, and we'll hire them as nurses as well. So the national interest exemption letters were helpful, and then we were trying to get candidates to get work permits because the restrictions would allow you to enter Canada if you had a work permit. So we were able to get that successfully for one person, and one time we just figure it out as we go, right? So trying to just threw everything at them and tried to see what they would accept. And then they check with HQ and they come back to me, and then we celebrate or we cry.
Wow, that's amazing. I can imagine how rough and tumble this whole process has been. And the government is really big on making these big splash announcements. And lately there's been lots of splash, but I don't know, as far as the actual, when the waves kind of settle down, you know, the pool is not very deep when it comes to actually explaining how this is going to occur. And so I know you're still waiting for those program delivery instructions and to see how everything is going to really play out. But I find this program quite fascinating, I'll be honest. I remember a couple of years ago, I had some discussions with one of the opposition critics, and they were very, very vocal against, you know, creating pathways that in some way they saw as subverting the fair process in, you know, and we were talking specifically about Roxham Road and refugees coming in, and why in the world we wouldn't allow skilled refugee claimants to be able to go through the programs, the express entry, the provincial nominee programs, even, and as an example, the TR to PR pathway. But all of these programs specifically exclude anyone who's a refugee claimant. And so I love this. I think this is great. I think this is a fantastic development. And so just to clarify, this process, the EMPP, is something that is added